Hi friends, so I shared some thoughts yesterday about why I thought Tulsi Gabbard supported Res 248, which is an anti-BDS legislation and anti-boycott, divestments and sanctions legislation, which really is very, very bad for Palestinians who are being oppressed in the apartheid state of Israel. Well, I should say it's much, much worse than apartheid at its height in South Africa. To call it apartheid, as Noam Chomsky said, is a gift to Israel in a way, because it's way, way worse than that. Anyway, the BDS campaign that helped bring the end of apartheid in South Africa, that is what is happening toward Israel from the global community, and it's actually working. And that's why, the Likud party in Israel, which is a right-wing, very right-wing, full-on racist party, why they're sort of freaking out, and the AIPAC, the Israel lobby, is doing things like proposing this sort of resolution. That's who is behind this resolution that Tulsi Gabbard signed on to, that Ro Khanna signed on to, that Ayanna Pressley signed on to, and others. So that's it's a really, really unfortunate move, and I explained all of that yesterday and why that is. And today I wanted to just add to that video. I heard that same commentator a couple of days ago when she was commenting on this Res 246, and she said, but what if if it was a one-state solution? See, Tulsi Gabbard is supporting a two-state solution, which is ridiculous, since most Palestinian land has been illegally settled now, and there's hardly anything left. And I showed you that sort of map of the various stages of how it's basically there's hardly anything left for them, and I'll show you it again. But this particular commentator said, but what if all the Palestinian refugees came home? If there was a one-state solution, that would mean that they outnumber the Israelis. And by the way, Israelis are not just Jews. There's all kinds of people who are Israelis, and some of them some are black Jews. And by the way, black Jews get a lot of there's a lot of racism towards black Jews. There's a lot of racism towards people who are fleeing countries due to our Western imperialism, and they happen to be black. They've been threatened to be removed from the country, deported out of the country, and this is, so it's a sort of a white supremacist thing going on there. The Likud party, the Israeli government wants a Jewish state. They don't want, and they've even said that. I've shown you the meme where Bibi Netanyahu has said that he doesn't care about other citizens in Israel. He basically wants a Jewish state. When that was started up, it wasn't meant to be, when Palestinians, when their homeland was given away by imperialists, which had no right to do that, it wasn't meant to be a Jewish state. It wasn't meant to be a state that was solely for Jews, some sort of ethno-supremacist state, even though it was totally wrong to give away somebody else's homeland. It certainly wasn't meant to be anyway, the kind of thing that Netanyahu wants, or that Zionists want. So that's something to remember. But just remember also that it's not just Palestinians, it's not just Arabs that are being persecuted, although they're the most persecuted group. And I've listed those 7 programs. It's a must-watch for the Empire Files. You must watch them to find out how oppressed they are, the Palestinians. But it's not just Arabs who are being oppressed. It's it's black people, and any black people, black Jewish people too, because they're black. So let's just remember that. But anyway, back to this issue of if all Palestinian refugees came back to Israel, say if there was a one-state solution, which is the preferred thing, a one-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians live in peace side by side with equal rights. That's what Palestinians want, equal rights, and it's far from that. So just say 6 million or 6 million Palestinian refugees that have been displaced since the Nakba. I can't be sure of that number, but it's about that or more. Just say they all came back to live in what is now called Israel. Well, that would be so what if you have a functioning democracy, which Israel does not, it gives the impression that it does, but it doesn't. If you had a functioning democracy, you would it wouldn't matter who was the majority. If Palestinians outnumbered Israelis, that shouldn't matter in a functioning, healthy democracy. So anybody who's saying, "Oh no, if Palestinians came back, they'd outnumber the the Israelis," that should not be a factor in this. And so what if that happens? As I said, if you have a functioning democracy, no majority group should be dictating in a healthy democracy, and we don't have many today in the world, but we certainly don't have one in the United States as an oligarchy, and their electoral system is broken and corrupt, and there's money in politics, lobbying, and look at the Israeli lobby, how they've managed to get people to sign on to this resolution and other things, and they've just put through another gigantic, I think it's $700 billion package of military aid to Israel just recently, which I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Ro Khanna may have even signed on to, and Tulsi Gabbard, I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that, so don't take my word for it. But, that is just something that's just gone through again. So still, they're supporting a brutal occupation where they're executing Palestinians in non-violent protests at the fence of the open-air prison that is Gaza. That's what's going on. And tens of thousands have been wounded by live ammunition at this non-violent protest, the Great March of Return. And 200 plus people have been executed at the fence of the Great March of Return. Many of them children, and some paraplegics, and some medics, and journalists. So, this is what I think they've just passed that. A package, this military aid package that is absolutely huge, and this, what it turns out to be, is $10.5 million a day is given to Israel to continue on this brutal occupation of Palestinians. There's a tit for tat going on here with the U.S. and Israel. Israel helps cause chaos in the Middle East when it suits, like in Syria and elsewhere. Bombing Syria, and there's a tit for tat going on. The U.S. gives them military aid to eventually wipe out Palestinians, and Israel helps destabilize countries in the Middle East, which is the whole point of imperialism, to keep every country in a complete managed chaos situation, which also affects Russia and other countries that are surrounding them. It's this whole destabilization, and of course, the ultimate goal, of course, is taking oil and other resources and settling in corporations to then run these countries. And of course in Afghanistan, I'd say I would hazard a guess that the amount of opium, the increase in opium production in Afghanistan, which is way more than before the invasion, in the beginning of this century, I'm sure that money for opium is probably being funneled to the CIA, seriously. So anyway, back to this thing about the majority, who's the majority in Israel if there's a one-state solution. It should not matter who is the majority. I think what people are worried about is that Palestinians are going to treat Israelis the same way that Israelis are treating Palestinians. You see, it's this projection onto Palestinians that they're going to be as monstrous towards Israelis as Israelis have been towards Palestinians. The Israeli government and the majority of Israelis at this point have a genocidal intent, and they openly call for genocide in the streets. If you watch those programs I told you about, the 7 programs from the Empire Files, you can literally see people doing that, and they talk about Palestinians as if they're vermin. It's sort of like likened to the kind of attitudes, I'm sorry to say, that that the Nazis had towards Jewish people.
But how do Jewish Israeli citizens feel, those who are not in the government or living in illegal settlements? Last year, I traveled around the West Bank to release a series for the Empire Files on the plight of Palestinians, featuring their voices and stories. But I also went to speak to average Israelis in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. We're here in Zion Square in Jerusalem, which the government has actually declared to rename Tolerant Square. And we're just going to ask everyday Israelis what they think about the situation. You're American. Where are you from, and why did you come here?
I'm from New York, and I came here with my family when I was younger to make Aliyah. because it was always my parents' dream to come to Israel because we're religious.
So, are you American?
Yes.
Oh, cool. When did you move here and why?
I moved here 11 years ago. My family moved here because this is the country of the Jewish people and the future of the Jewish people, and we want to be here.
How old are you guys?
18.
We're 18 years old. Now we are here in Israel taking a leadership course, and we're going to the army for a few months to see how life's here. And then we hope to bring back some of this knowledge to our youth movements.
So you're like an internship with the army?
It's about 2 months, and they show you everything about the army.
Israel is a great place. It's a nice place. You should come and visit. I love Israel, and I feel safe here.
All that misconceptions are not true. Like, there's not people with knives every day, and there's not people exploding.
Palestinians?
Yeah. No, but pretty much the life here is really good.
For people living here, it's just normal to see people in the army walking around with guns, and you feel completely safe and protected.
I feel like we know who the threat is, and it's not coming from anyone random, as opposed to in the rest of the world that it could be anyone. Here we know who our enemy is, and we know that they are out to get us.
Who is the enemy?
Who's the enemy? That's a very good question. I don't think it's specifically any nation. I think it's the people that are so interested in being politically correct that they won't actually go after the people that are trying to cover things up.
I think that the Islam it's a very bad disease, not just for Israel, for all around the world. We can see it. They think they all have to be Islam. If you're not Islam, they will kill you.
A lot of Americans don't really understand what Israel's like. We hear a lot of things in the news. A lot of people are sympathizing with the Palestinian plight. Can you talk about what it's like to kind of live in this situation?
First of all, it's very hard. I'm in an organization. It's called Lahava. It's against the Jews shouldn't marry Arabs.
Did you say the organization did what again?
The organization is the thing of it is that Jews shouldn't marry Arabs.
Shouldn't marry Arabs. Why do you feel strongly about that?
Because Jews is a special nation that God gave it to the Jews, and we don't want Jews to get mixed up together with a different nation.
I think Israelis have to take over, and they have to kick them away. It will be much better not to kill them, just to go back to Arab countries.
You can't deal with these people. There's no need to try. There's no need to talk to them. What we can do is when they do enough harm, we retaliate. That's war, and that's the situation that any Jew who lives in Israel has to deal with.
יש לך משהו להגיד, אומרת
על מה?
גם ככה ערבים, מרשימם.
אוקיי, בסדר בעברית? פשוט מאוד, צריך להיכנס לשטחים, וכל מחבל שעושה פיגוע צריך להרוג אותו, צריך להרוג את המחבלים, ואז הם יפחדו ולא יעשו לנו בעיות, והכל יהיה בסדר. הם יהיו בכפרים שלהם, אנחנו נחיה פה, לא צריך להיות ביחד, והכל בסדר.
I think also that every Arab that doing a terrorism attack, we have to kill him, and not because he's an Arab, because he's a terrorist. I think you should also kick out the family, because it all begins with chinuch. How you say it?
Education.
Whatever they teach the kids does. It's families.
I'm think that we need to... איך אומרים להעיף את הערבים? כן, תגידי לי את המילה הזאת. נו, תגידי לי מילים, אני לא
יודעת לתרגם. I don't know how to translate really well.
I think we should give them a country. If you're doing any problem, you just go in there to give them a country, and then it's going to be a war between countries, If they're going to throw rockets, we're going to throw one big one and done.
I don't think there's any answer to it.
Really?
There's only one way, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it. Or try to stop them a different way. It never worked.
You mean all Arabs or Gaza or?
I believe that they, like, I hope to believe they're not, but I do think they are, because I don't trust them. You can't trust them, and that's the only way I believe that. The only way is just to stop it completely.
I think that we're miserable. The Arabs make a פיגועים and we need to kill Arabs. No.
Okay.
We'll talk about this later.
All right, cool. Well,
there is also Jewish civilians that hate Arabs. Yeah, I'm not saying, but we have also people that like the Arabs and everything, like Smolanim.
I think another thing that the Jews should have rights to hate them. I think we have the right to hate them. I don't see a reason why not. I wouldn't trust any of them.
To better understand this mentality, I also talked to Ronnie Barkin, a Jewish Israeli citizen who grew up in the country and is now an ardent critic of the notion of a Jewish state.
Like anyone growing up in Israel, I went through the whole indoctrination mechanism. And we're being trained to be soldiers from kindergarten, literally from kindergarten. The moment I realized I managed to sort of overcome that indoctrination, then everything became very clear, because the situation is crystal clear. One of the main successes of Israeli propaganda is to convince the world that the situation is complicated. But it's far from being complicated. It's probably the least complicated conflict in the world today. And it's all about basically those who have the power, those who oppress and subjugate and tread over the indigenous people of the land who have been oppressed and subjugated and expelled from their land. And this is what it's about. The situation here is not very different other than the way it is perceived in the world and among Israeli society themselves. They like to perceive themselves as being something else, as being, liberal and progressive and all of that. And I also thought of myself as such until I realized that actually, this is not the case. The case is very clear, and I'm not on the right side of history. And that's when, the moment I managed to overcome this type of brainwashing, then the rest was very easy. The State of Israel is all about creating a place which is for one select group and only that. It's not only the fact that they wanted to take over, to usurp the land and the resources and all of that. It's also about this exclusive nature of the place, that this is ours and only ours. And even any Palestinian being born in Israel, even if they're Israeli citizens, is already regarded as some sort of a threat to the state. Mm-hmm. The need to segregate, the need to separate and not to interact with Palestinians is part of Israeli identity. So we have to understand that Israeli identity depends on denying Palestinian identity and denying either the existence of Palestinians altogether or at the very least denying their identity, their culture and so on. And also, right after the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, right after the Palestinians were expelled from their homes and became refugees, the very next thing that happened was that there was a concerted effort of mass looting of books and other cultural artifacts from Palestinian homes, which was led by the National Library in Israel. So it's for a reason that when we say existence is resistance for Palestinians, this is true. Just by very existing on their land, this is an act of resistance in itself. Even more so when they actually claim their rights, claim their identity, do cultural work, like produce Palestinian culture, that is an act of war.
After learning a lot in Jewish history and Israel history, I've seen that people make a big deal about a lot of different areas. But if you look back, correct me if I'm wrong, if you look back at the history, the areas, these places are really rightfully ours. If it was any other country that would have conquered these places or taken over these places, nobody would make a big deal. It's just because it's Israel and there's anti-Semitism and everything.
They kicked us about 2,000 years ago, and we came back. We have Jerusalem. We built every stone here. Every stone, 3,000 years ago. Over here,
this all is 3,000 years ago.
This is the city of David. 2,500 years ago. all history of the Jewish people, and the Islam doesn't have history at all in this country.
I think that they should actually look at a history book and look at the progression of history and who occupied Israel, go further back. So if it could be that the Palestinians occupied Israel, that's true, but who occupied that before that? And if you keep going back to the times of like the Bible, you'll see that it was indeed the Jews that did occupy.
Palestinian, where are the Palestinian people during 4,000 years under the Ottoman? Answer me.
Well, I'm the journalist here, so I don't...
And how God punished is the sins by other people. He said, he sent the Nazis, and now he sent Palestinians.
Okay.
But it's really rightfully ours if you look at the history and at like the wars, and we didn't even start a lot of the wars, and we conquered these places rightfully, like it's ours.
We brought the settlements in by Gaza, you know, all the Gush Katif strip.
Gave Gaza back.
Well, we gave part of Israel. It's not that it's not Gaza. We do things for peace.
I think that the Jews came here, they took this land, and this is our land now, and I don't think there should be here no Arabs. Like Arabs, they want, we gave them Gaza, they should go live there quietly. If they want, they should go back to Iraq, I don't know, to wherever they want. But this is a place that God gave it to the Jews, and we don't want the Arabs to be here.
And before they accuse anyone of occupying, they should actually look back and look at history.
So you wouldn't call any of this occupied territory?
No, I think that whatever deals were made and wars were fought, they took the land, and that's the way things work. I mean, would you call America occupied by Americans because the British used to rule?
The people who kicked the Jews out of Israel were the Arabs. 1,400 years later, we come back. Now, I'm not saying that we can blame the people living here for what happened, but you gotta accept that that's some kind of divine justice, that their great-great-great-great-grandfathers kicked my great-great-great-grandfather out of here, and then we come back, and all of a sudden they're like, well, no, we don't want it, it's not fair. They took the land from us, not the Romans, and not the Persians, and not the Byzantines. It was Arabs who took this land from Jews. And so, yeah, we came back and we took what was rightfully ours.
Besides the fact that before the Jews came to here in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was like a barren land. Like, because the Jews came here, it started to like flourish or whatever and become actually, like, people started planting things and making settlements in all these places. If the Jews never came here, then it'd be in the same place it was like 200 years ago, or not where it is today. And so the Jews came here and they started making it better for also the Arabs, and they only start to be an issue because the Arabs started to make it more of an issue.
How many people think like you? What is the state of the left wing within Israeli society?
So the people who think like me are a negligible few. And I would argue that there is no left in Israel and never ever existed. What you have are those self-proclaimed leftists, liberal Zionists, who basically speak the language of peace and human rights and so on in order to sugarcoat their racism and supremacy. And they speak a very different language than the acting government, for example, because the acting government is clearly a right-wing government. They are shameless about their racist attitudes and so on. They say this is ours and only ours. Many of them are decent enough to say, yes, there was the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, and that's a good thing. The problem is that we haven't finished the job, that there are still Palestinians left in Palestine. With the other type of Zionists, with the so-called left in Israel, we cannot even agree about the basic facts. But for them, in order to feel that they are both Zionist and moral at the same time, they have to keep lying to themselves all the time, every moment of every day. So they have perfected this whole discourse of lies in order to lie to themselves and also in order to lie to the international community, in order to justify their existence here in that.
I think the occupation does have a role, a big role and important. I don't think there should be no occupation at all, but in the occupation things needs to be more human.
Do you get called a leftist a lot?
Yeah, and I am a leftist.
Is leftist a slur
Yes.
sometimes?
Yes, it is. It is not a good way to be called in Israel.
Israel doesn't want to compromise on security. They have to do a blockade. They have to kind of cut this off. It's it's ridiculous what people have to go through there, but it's also ridiculous what we have to do to keep ourselves safe.
We don't want to fight with them. But if they ask for it, they will get it. And we're much stronger, much stronger. We are behave very gently and morally, very gently with them.
It could get a lot worse, is what you're saying.
If the Russians was here, 2 days, they will kill all of them. If the Americans will be here, they will kill them 2 days. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about nothing.
Israel's holding back.
Very, very.
But it's war, and civilians get killed in war, and it's a horrible, on their side, less on our side, but at the same time, we put money into protecting ourselves.
Well, look, the refugees their situation is horrible, but no other nation in the world gets the refugee status the Palestinians do. The Palestinians, third-generation people, are still considered refugees.
I had friends that were Canadian. They went on their passports. They wanted to see what the refugee camps were. They wanted to see what it was all about. They came back. They said it's nothing what I imagined it.
Better than they imagined? Or?
They said people were driving around with nice cars, people had nice houses, villas, things like that. They thought people were being oppressed, like living in tents. It's like they probably were, like maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, like in the past.
For them, in order for them to be Zionist and moral, in order for them to have a Jewish and democratic state, they needed, first of all and foremost, to create a Jewish majority by force, by driving away the indigenous people from their land. And this is how the state was founded. And immediately afterwards, they created a whole legal system that will make sure that those who have been expelled will never be allowed back, and those who remained on their land, because not everyone was expelled, will never be equal citizens. Unfortunately, what we hear on mainstream media, this so-called discourse or so-called debate between the right and the left is about that. It's about, do we want a large Israel, which is Arab-free, or do we want a small Israel, which is Arab-free? This is the debate that's taking place.
Last question. There's this whole international movement of leftists and activists who want to boycott Israel for human rights violations. Being here, seeing that, and what do you just think about that?
I think the BDS movement, the leaders of the BDS movement, or everyone that thinks that Israel is bad, if they should read up about the topic, the other side, and they should come here and see how everybody's comfortable.
People right now, they're looking at Israel and they're calling it an apartheid state. And Israel is not an apartheid state. There's places, my family from 5 generations ago, they were from Jenin. You can't find one Jew in Jenin right now. It's totally Jew-free. So if you want to think about a racist apartheid state, it seems it's more, in my opinion, coming from their side.
And just a response, I guess, to kind of this international movement, the BDS movement, and also the movement that says settlements are illegal, they're encroaching on Palestinian land. Can you respond to that accusation?
I think the response would be two-part. The first part would be very simple. Nobody gives Turkey problems for their settlements in Cyprus. It's an anti-Semitic thing. Maybe they don't know that they hate Jews, but they give us so much trouble. The UN only talks about Israel. What about North Korea? What about Russia? Then the second thing would be to say is that...
Even from the UN?
Completely from the UN. I mean, come on. You're talking about that we're worse than the North Korean dictatorship? Like, nobody in the world thinks that. So those people in the UN and all these peace activists, look, she's a woman. She's walking around however she wants here in Israel, right? There's female genital mutilation in Egypt, not very far from here. Why don't people talk about that?
I think that we should have not more rights. I think we have rights to build more houses for our citizens, and a lot of things that Israel gets criticism for, other countries will never get it.
אני רוצה להגיד פה לראש ממשלה פה בארץ, בישראל, אין מצב שיהיה פה שלום בארץ. אי אפשר לעשות איתם שלום, הם תמיד שונאים אותנו. אם אי אפשר לעשות שלום והמצב ככה לא יכול להישאר, אז צריך לטפל בהם בדרכים אחרות, אין מה לעשות.
It's irrelevant. The views of Israelis about the situation are totally irrelevant to the question of how do we change the situation. Did it matter what white people think about apartheid in South Africa at the time? The question is, how do we end apartheid and how do we end Israeli crimes? You know, every Israeli official will claim to speak on behalf of the Jewish people and will even demand of Palestinians to recognize Israel's right to be a Jewish state and so on. I don't recognize Israel's right to be a Jewish state because it is not Jewish by religion. It is only Jewish by supremacy. Israel is Jewish just like South Africa was white, in the exact same context, with the exact same meaning. And obviously any decent person around the world should oppose that because it is inherently racist, and more than that. And it also happens to be very much against international law. So when we talk about Israel as an apartheid state, even though it's not exactly like South Africa, it neatly falls under the legal definition of the crime of apartheid, which is a very serious crime, one of the few crimes that is regarded as a crime against humanity. Which means that all countries of the world are obligated to do something against it, not to be complicit in that. And what we're coming and saying is, no, there are basic fundamental Palestinian rights that must be respected. One of them is ending of occupation, of course, but that's not the main issue, that's part of the issue. The other two rights are equality inside Israel proper, or what we call Palestine 48, and the rights of refugees which have been expelled from there since the very foundation of the State of Israel. These are fundamental rights, they must be respected. And now we can debate, we can argue about how do we implement these rights. I'm willing to discuss that. I'm not willing to discuss, should we have equality or not. This is not negotiable.
Avi Martin interviews random people, and the sort of things they're saying about Arabs and Palestinians is really shocking. Shocking today. Anyway, shocking any time, but really shocking. So, particularly from, a country where they're always going, never again. Never again. And yet it's being replicated in their own country. This is the tragedy of it. It's just awful. And then to call people who call out this much worse than apartheid situation in Israel, call them anti-Semitic is just a joke. And sadly, they're doing it to people like Jeremy Corbyn and anybody else who is Ilhan Omar, anybody else who is Rashid Tlaib, anybody else who is calling out this dreadful, dreadful, brutal occupation is called anti-Semitic. As if you're not supposed to call out human rights abuses that are absolutely happening every single moment there, absolutely horrific. You're not supposed to call them out because to do so is somehow anti-Semitic. Seriously, it's just appalling. That's the propaganda for you, and that's the Hasbara for you. That's the Hasbara narrative that is put out by the Israeli government. They literally pay thousands of university students and other people to try and direct the narrative towards a pro-Israel one. You probably noticed that on social media now, that the minute there's any discussion or any sort of thing about Palestine, you'll get at least 2 or 3 people come on and start sort of going on about Palestine in a negative way and calling them terrorists and all this sort of thing. And they're paid trolls, Hasbara trolls. And that's been proven. Literally, there's lots and lots of paid people and university students are given free balloon rides and all sorts of things to go and do that. There's all sorts of trolling going on now, paid trolling going on social media. The military has thousands of people changing the narrative when any sort of peace is talked about or anything about anti-imperialism. You've probably noticed it. I've noticed it particularly in the last 3 years. It's become a real problem. It's become such a problem for me that when I see people starting up about calling Palestinians terrorists and all that sort of thing, I just reach for the block button. I have no time to spend. There's no time left to spend. If I see people being climate deniers, and there's also paid people from different corporations who are on there to try and, you see it all the time, climate change deniers who are absolutely ridiculous, and I would hazard a guess they're paid as well, or they're just completely, completely non-thinkers. I was going to call them knuckle draggers, but I don't want to offend primates. As I'm vegan. So anyway, anyhow, that's the thing. Sadly, on social media, it not only is Twitter and Facebook their arms and Google and YouTube, they're arms of the military-industrial complex, the security state, national security state, the surveillance state. But they're swarming with paid trolls that are there to change the narrative towards war, towards regime change, towards keeping Israel how it is, which is brutally suppressing Palestinians and killing them with impunity. Climate change deniers. It's a sewer, really, of sort of propaganda, basically. And if it wasn't for the fact that there were so many good journalists on Facebook, I would have gone long ago, because I cannot stand it. I just cannot. It makes me sick at this point. But anyway, so does YouTube isn't much better. Anytime you mention Palestine, they either whack an age limit on, age restriction on it or something. Or it's suppressed by algorithms. Somebody just decides, no, that's not acceptable. Algorithm changes and that's the end of it. It just clicks in. It's automatic. Anyway, I've gone off the track, but so my point is that in a functioning, healthy democracy, in a one-state Israel, where you have Palestinians and Israelis living side by side with equal rights, in a functioning, healthy democracy, it shouldn't matter who is the majority. It shouldn't matter if Palestinians are the majority. It shouldn't matter if Israelis are the majority, or whatever other group are the majority. It shouldn't matter. It should be, it shouldn't matter, basically. So this sort of fear-mongering and sort of, I would say, tinged with racism that the Palestinians are and also this idea that they're going to institute Sharia law. That's another sort of myth, and sort of which I think is tinged with racism too, and Islamophobia. That suddenly Israel's going to be run by Palestinians that are governed by Sharia law. These sort of things. A lot of Palestinians are Christians. A certain percentage of Palestinians are Christians. I think it's 40%, something like that. Palestinians are not all Muslims, and it's just so Islamophobic to just immediately jump to that Sharia law thing. Oh, look who's here. It's Rooney. And he's wearing his Bird Be Safe collar. No, we don't like to dress up our cats. Hey, Rooney. Anyway, I think he's trying to tell me he's hungry. But anyhow, so that's all I wanted to say. I just found that sort of disturbing that people were saying suddenly Israel's going to be overrun with Palestinians. I mean, they have the right to return anyway. They were, through violence, thrown out of their own country. That was through violence, and they have every right to return. And that's what the Great March of Return is about. There's a couple of million, refugees in Gaza, Palestinians, who want the Great March of Return is so that they can return to they're in this open-air prison that is Gaza. They want to return to their areas to live, which is their right. It's in the UN. It's their right to return. That's what the Great March of Return is. And they're being shot at the fence, executed, for demonstrating that that's their right. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I just think it's kind of a bit off when I hear people freaking out that suddenly the majority is going to be Palestinians in Israel if it's a one-state solution. What is wrong with Palestinians and Israelis living side by side with equal rights? What is wrong with that? Nothing is wrong with that. And anybody who has a problem with that, we need to ask them why. Why do you have a problem with the idea of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace? And all this fussing and carrying on that, oh my goodness, they're going to be the majority. The underlying fear there is that Israelis are going to be treated the way they've been treating Palestinians since the Nakba. I don't think that's going to be the case. I really don't. And that would be really bad if it was, but I do not think that's going to be the case. They just want to be able to come back to where they were thrown out of. That is their right, and that's what they want. There's nothing wrong with that. And and we in the West, who seem to think we know everything and the best thing for everybody in the fucking planet, we white people seem to think we know how everybody else should live and tell them how they should live. You know, this white supremacist colonialist attitude we have, that somehow this white man's burden business, that we know what's best for everybody. God, that gets tiresome. It gets so tiresome, and it's almost in the DNA of a lot of U.S. citizens. They've been raised to think that the U.S. is the best, it's American exceptionalism, the best country on the planet, that they have the best ideas and the best ways of going about it. They're the world's police, and everybody should bow down before them. Everybody should submit to them. Everybody should allow them to just take over their country. That's in the DNA of many Americans, I'm sorry to say. That needs to go, because that is these governments don't get in by accident. There is a lot of political corruption in the electoral system, but people vote them in. People vote them in, and people will keep voting for Tulsi Gabbard, even though she's demonstrated that she doesn't care about one of the most vulnerable groups on the planet, and she's happy to do something for AIPAC, which is the Israel lobby, and the Israel lobby dictates foreign policy to the government. So that gives you a little glimpse of what would happen if Tulsi Gabbard became president of the United States. And that's why I did those videos a few months ago, sort of trying to point out that she's flying under the radar about Israel, because I knew underneath it all the fact that she's never been clear about it, the fact that she gave that talk at Kufi, Christians United for Israel, in 2015, which is a really hair-raising speech. You should go and watch it. Go and watch it. It's on YouTube. You can see it in my previous video from the 28th of July on Faint Signals from Vega. You can see I've got a link to that in the information section. Go and have a look at that. I don't think she's going to withdraw the $10.5 million of military aid every day to Israel if she became president of the United States. I think, sadly, she's underneath it all, without actually stating it, she's a Zionist. She's totally on board with Israel being a Jewish state, and the Palestinians can go and do whatever the hell they want somewhere else in another part of whatever's left. I don't even know. Does she even realize how little land is left anyway? I mean, wowza, is what I can say to that. So that gives you a little idea of what she might be like on other policies. I mean, if you're allowing the, it might be too strong in saying that she's a secret Zionist. I might be being too strong there, but I mean, she got really defensive when Cenk Uygur, I don't like TYT, I don't like the Young Turks. I think they're totally Democratic Party sort of supporters and stuff, and Russiagaters and all of that. But they interviewed her, and when he said, what do you think about the occupation of the Palestinians? And she had a problem with that word occupation, from what I remember. And then finally she relented and sort of, and agreed it was an occupation, but you could see she was very cagey, and she didn't like him pressing her or even asking anything about it. You know, and I'm not surprised. After I saw that Kufi speech she gave, I'm not surprised she has such a problem, because I don't believe within 4 years she could change completely her position on what she was talking about at Kufi. I'd be really surprised if she has. If she's even half of it, if she's changed her position, that's still problematic. So anyway, that's really all I wanted to say, just this whole fear-mongering about what if Palestinians or refugees all return and they were the majority. Oh my goodness, the horror. You know, and this Sharia law, fear-mongering, Islamophobia stuff. The horror. I mean, seriously. And all West, you know, and we in the West sort of always giving, I mean, here I am giving my opinion, but I'm sick and tired of living in a world which is dominated by U.S. empire, basically going through countries and either militarily invading and overthrowing regimes, or just they're already in the West. Like my government here is basically, the CIA admitted to helping overthrow Gough Whitlam in 1975, and he was a really, really good prime minister, and he wasn't into neoliberalism, and he wasn't into warmongering, and that was they didn't like that, and so they helped get rid of him. They admitted that in 75, and ever since then it's been a neoliberal mess, and we've just been a vassal state of the United States, and it is becoming more and more like the United States every day, and that's scary to me, because it's never been perfect, and it was based on a genocide of indigenous people. It's also got a white supremacist colonial past. and it's still not good about indigenous issues at all. But it certainly had, when Gough Whitlam got in, there was free health care. It's still free to a certain degree, but they're whittling away at it intentionally until eventually it'll be just dysfunctional, and they try and make the public system dysfunctional so that they can privatize everything. That's what's been going on ever since Whitlam in 75 was ousted with the help of the CIA. So I have an axe to grind, but I also see the tremendous suffering caused by U.S. empire, and that it is at the center of a lot of the violence today. If there's violence in a country, you can bet that there's been a history of U.S. meddling, or there's currently a history of U.S. meddling. Look what they're doing in Venezuela. 40,000 people now have died from crippling U.S. sanctions. And here is, since 2017, and here is John Bolton going on about how awful the Maduro regime is and how the Venezuelans are suffering when these crippling sanctions are actually killing tens of thousands of Venezuelans. And the same is happening in Iran. Iran has got crippling sanctions now, and they're trying to start a war with Iran so that Venezuela sits on the largest reserve of oil in the world, and Iran is the fourth largest. And of course, if they destabilize Iran, that will affect the Belt, the Belt and Road, that the Chinese have been trying to connect all the different regions there for trade routes, etc. It'll destabilize that, and that's part of the plan too, to destabilize something that China is economically involved in, because as we've heard, as all these Democratic nominees, most of them have said China is the greatest threat. And you know why China, they think that's the greatest threat? Because it's becoming the greatest economy in the world now. And, capitalism is fine for the U.S. empire until somebody else is outdoing them, and then it's not fine. Competition is okay when they're on top. So, this whole thing, China is the greatest threat. The next thing they're setting up saber rattling. They've been setting up saber rattling towards China now for a few years, if you've seen The Coming War on China by journalist John Pilger. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, but that's all I wanted to say really about this, in addition to the video I did yesterday about Tulsi Gabbard and H-Res 246. So anyway, thanks for your comments from yesterday. I appreciate them. I hope that people will not give her a pass on this. I know that there will be people. There's people already saying, oh, Bernie's not perfect, Tulsi's not perfect. These are not small potatoes, these issues. They're not. These involve thousands and thousands and thousands of people's lives. It's like when Bernie Sanders was Russiagating. He was putting out videos about Russia, fear-mongering about Russia and that nonsense about Russia. That's not small potatoes, because now we have this Cold War now with Russia, and it's really, really scary. And people, countries are withdrawing from the nuclear treaties, and, it could end up in a great big fireball for all of us. These are no small potatoes, this Russiagate nonsense. Anyway, that's all I want to say. So please hit the subscribe button if you like the content. Please click the notifications bell, otherwise you don't receive updates. And thanks for your comments. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Viga. Till next time. Bye for now.